Okay, we are live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to or welcome back to Fragility Exhibitions and Events. My name is Christopher Schutte. I'm the Art Experiential and Innovation Director at Particle. Before we start, a very brief introduction to the project. This is a project and exhibition that's ongoing called Fragilità. It's launched by Particle with the gracious support of the Italian Embassy in Kuala Lumpur. So special thanks again to Ambassador Majipinto. We are also very grateful to the distinguished contributors that have been part of this project, including Culture It, including the Fondazione ICA Milano, who will moderate today's session, Benini, Magazzino Italian Art, Art Tribune, and many others. So today is the actual fourth episode of Fragility Talks. The moderation again is by Fondazione ICA Milano and produced by Particle. Together with ICA, what we're trying to do, given the conditions and the current state of things, we're trying to bring and get people excited about art. And the choice of doing actually live streaming is one of these choices that we've made. It's been conceived so it can actually bring people closer to art in these kind of difficult times. So the live experience is adding into the exhibition itself. So lastly, on a practical note, just before handing over to Stefano, we'd like to invite our guests to interact as much as possible. So we have two ways of interacting. One is Slido. You're welcome to log on to Slido. You can scan the QR code or go directly onto slido.com and type in the code. Or you can also directly comment on the YouTube channel of Fragilità. If you look up Fragilità and Particle on YouTube, you'll find us. So let's give you just a minute to have a look at the code. Okay, and without further ado, I can hand the word over to Stefano Pedrocchi. He is the head of production at Fondazione ICA Milano, and he will introduce our two guests and moderate today's conversation. We're very lucky to have two distinguished universities and two distinguished guests today with us. And so enjoy the conversation, and I'll see you at the end. Bye for now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stefano Pedrocchi from ICA Milan. I am the head of production of the ICA Milan, and I would very much like to thank you for joining us today, and thank you our guests for today's session. We are very glad to have them, and we hope we can have a very interesting conversation with them. Our first guest is Professor Paola Cillo from Bocconi University. She's an associate professor at Bocconi University. She has a PhD in management from Bocconi, and her research focuses on the innovation in symbolic industries, on market-oriented innovation strategies, on pattern on new products launch in low-tech and high-tech context. And she teaches courses on innovation management, idea generation, and new product development. Our second guest is Professor Kenneth Feinstein from Sunway University in Malaysia. He's an artist, he's a theorist, a curator, and writer. He has his focus, the focus of his writings is on media theory and philosophy. He has published many books and articles on given talks on issues surrounding the ethics of new media practices. And he's the author of The Image That Doesn't Want to Be Seen. And he holds a PhD in media philosophy from the European Graduate School in Switzerland. I'm very glad to have you today, Professor Cillo and Professor Feinstein. And I would like to add some reference to and thank you, Bocconi University and Sunway University, for being part of the project through you. So I would like to start leveraging from your background, and I would like to start with you, Professor Cillo. I would like to ask you, in light of the recent events that have struck the world, and given your experience in analyzing financial constraint related to creativity, I would like to ask you what may be the consequences, if any, of any rise of financial constraints in this industry of creativity. I do know that you're particularly familiar with the fashion industry, but I think it would be very nice to have your view also in relation to the industry of fine arts. So if you like to,
I'll try my best. So I leverage actually on all my research and the findings of my research that of course are related to fashion, but in reality, the study you were mentioning was in fact focused on cuisine. So like we actually did an experiment in a school of chefs. So it was also related to something that is creative, that has to do with food. And the main idea that was within the study was that, and this is actually something that is supported very much into research on creativity, is that people take the most out of themselves when they are in a situation of constraint. That constraint that can be of any kind, can be like emotional, psychological, moments in which you feel like that you're not 100% with your like energy or emotional energy, or they can be like constraints in terms of like access to specific inputs that you need for doing a job, for doing something creative, or financial constraints. Financial constraints are the one that we actually consider in our in the study. That can be also like a time constraint. The constraint can come in different ways. So it has been testing on many different like inputs, and the idea is that again, people try to do and to leverage at the best their options and creativity when they are in a situation of constraints. The point that is related to that, though, also has to do with the ability of people in that specific moment actually to recognize in themselves the energy to actually take the constraint as a challenge, right? Because this very much depends on the emotional condition of the person that is doing that, and also on the willingness to undertake the challenge. So what we find is that there are some people that have some kind of personality traits that allow them to take the constraints as a challenge. Others instead that on the opposite take it like as a discouraging element, and so they actually are less productive in a situation of constraint. Now I think that in art, what we are seeing now in the recent past, I mean, I'm not an expert, so I don't want to, say things that are beyond the scope of what I know. I feel like I'm not at ease when I actually overcome like the boundaries of what I know, but especially in front of like an expert. But so sorry if I say something that is completely like out of like scope. But my idea is that what we have recently seen, in many conditions, in many form of arts that have been emerging like more recently, is in fact, for example, the trend on using like inputs that are like recycled like product, for example, right? As one of, there is a form of art that's been shaped completely based on like the upcycling of used materials, right? And this is, for example, like now a very in fashion as well, is very important trend, and that to do, of course, with the sustainability of the environment and with the opportunity actually to avoid making some kind of, it's not a matter of constraint, it's avoiding like trying to misuse or overuse a specific like kind of materials and products. And in general, I believe that there are now opportunities to leverage on constraint as a form of art. I mean, the recent pandemic, as I think it's a great has been for all of us a great experience, in the sense that we were locked down in a matter of days, and we had to do with what we had. So we needed to be very creative. For example, for us to stream like classes that were meant to be done in presence and do them just with a computer, because when we were in lockdown, we didn't have much more than a computer and stream. So it was all we had. And so I believe that this is something that has been shows the resilience that can be enacted when we act in a situation of emergency or a situation of constraint.
I see. Thank you very much. It's I would like to build up.
Can I add something?
Yeah,
to this?
indeed.
Yeah, because I kind of feel like from the perspective of art practice, constraint is very important. That when you think about a project that you're going to do, that generally we kind of say that once you put in the constraints, you can go deeper. If you can do everything, you just stay on the surface. But when you start working on things and you say, I'm going to do a series that I'm going to confine it to these kind of tools and these kind of things, we get, it gives you the room to think deeper and more creatively. It gives you room to be creative because you aren't thinking about everything. And then you can go deeper. So I think a lot of what you said is reflected very much in how artists work and what artists do. So, hopefully the world has been learning from artistic practice in these times.
Absolutely, yeah. It is very consistent also with actually the studies that I have been drawing upon. The fact that you're saying that if you are in a situation of constraints, if you're limited in the things that you can use, you go much deeper. You try to exploit all the opportunities that the things you have at hand can offer you. And this is, very, very true.
I'm constantly trying to get my students to think that way.
Yeah.
And do you think that situations in which the constraint might not come from the financial related, let's say, events, but from more personal? So the idea of fragility, do you think that can generate some sort of innovation that it's extremely positive? So can we trace some sort of very powerful force from situations where you can see no exit from? At least I think everyone in the last year has perceived from time to time situations and moments in which you could really you really couldn't tell, or you really couldn't see the end of the tunnel. So what do you think in terms of education such a situation can foster? I would like to ask it to you, Ken, first, if you...
Oh, God. I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about this, about fragility, and to me, the more I think about it, the more I think of fragility being sort of being able to hold things together as they're just about to burst apart. And I mean, within education, it's been really kind of interesting. Again, with the online thing, it's been kind of interesting to try to get beyond the fact that just seeing big faces on a screen tend to stimulate the fight or flight interest of us, and to get people to interact and hopefully become friends. It's kind of been interesting this year to see students who never get to meet each other personally and are taking classes, and we try to create some extra time for them to just chat amongst themselves without teachers around, and start to build relationships that shouldn't actually exist or shouldn't be able to naturally happen, because this is such an artificial and such a strange way of trying to know each other. I mean, it's a lot easier when we're staying in touch with friends who we've known for years. But to meet people and to become good friends with people through this is really kind of fascinating. And yeah, I mean, so it's that idea of how do you hold things together on the verge of bursting apart that I think is interesting about that kind of situation. And to me, that's fragility.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Ken was saying. If I may add, I mean, I think fragility has like two different dimensions. Like one that is like more permanent, I would define it like this, that all of us, I mean, we all have fragilities, of different kinds, like I might be too emotional, I might be like, I have low self-confidence or fears of like whatever, and then there are like more temporary kind of fragility that are related to specific events that happen to you, and where you feel like that you cannot really kind of take things like all together, and you're feeling like somehow threatened, or in a situation of like weakness somehow, right? I think this situation of the pandemic, the good of this situation is that somehow we were all in the same kind of fragility. Of course, there are people that have been hit more because of like health issues, or because of course, of like people lost jobs, and really, I mean, not all is the same, but we were all exposed to the same kind of constraints and of problems, and we had all to cope with the situation that was, of course, like at the beginning probably some kind of adventures, later on not so adventurous anymore. So, I mean, quite tiring and stressful, and each one of us has a lot of and the fact that you were mentioning before, Stefano, that we are seeing like the end of the tunnel. It happens, and we see some like lights, and then again we go in the deep dark. So it's really like the uncertainty that is around there is probably like the main source of fragility. The fact that we don't really know where we're heading to and how we're gonna cope with it. I mean, in the next future. So
yeah, it seems like now that we can see that it could possibly end, it feels even farther away, because when is that ever going to happen? Yeah. I mean, you start having these conversations about, well, have you had your shot? Have you gotten a shot? Are they offering it to you? And then you have to wait for like half the world or 2/3 of the world to have their shots before it's really over. And that's kind of an interesting thing too.
Yeah,
and you're on the knife edge all the time.
Yeah. I would like to build up a bit on what Paola was mentioning, and the idea of having temporary constraint and permanent constraint. I would like to ask to the two of you whether you think that a situation like this might come up again in the future. So shall we consider a pandemic sort of a temporary constraint, or something that might come again? We don't know when. We hopefully don't see it again, but it's common idea that this might be the case in the future again. So I would like to ask you your idea of whether such a situation may represent a temporary constraint or a permanent constraint. I would like to ask it to you first, Paola, since you brought it up.
It's interesting because while at the beginning I was thinking, it is temporary, it's going to pass, and then clearly, it's not. But I think that what is more relevant about this crisis and this pandemic is that, when we were going to come out of it, or, in a sense, we'll pass the worst part of it. Probably we will get out stronger, in the sense that we will have resources and like experience and knowledge, hopefully, that we didn't have before. I think that the fact that the healthcare, the healthcare system and the pharmaceutical companies have come out with a vaccine in like 6 months is something like really incredible. It's something that no one could bet when the crisis started, and I think this is one of those elements, those strengths we should somehow take with us out of this pandemic, and give us like the opportunity to leverage on them to face, of course, the challenges that we will have to overcome in the next future, because we will have many different challenges that this pandemic, when and if we will go out of it, we will have to face. Clearly, the economy is going to be like completely disrupted, and we still have, the worst part is yet to be seen, unfortunately. So I believe these elements are those that should keep us, stay strong and try to, think that we can manage even the worst scenarios that might happen in the future.
From living in Southeast Asia, the perspective is this is the third pandemic, because there was SARS and then there was MERS and now there's this. So I think about it more like economic downturns. They're periodic things that will happen on we don't know how regular, but on a semi-regular basis. Just like we had the economic crisis in 2000 and then the crash in 2008, and now we have this. It's a similar kind of thing, and we have to think about these things not as temporary or permanent, as much as thinking about them as things that there's always a possibility of them returning. And so, here in Malaysia, we haven't been doing as well as we did at first. For the first 10 months, we only had like less than 100,000 cases, and then it skyrocketed. But deaths have been very low because people treat it differently because they have that experience. So I think that we all need to think about this not as temporary or permanent, but as something that will repeat. That we've had it, it's gone, and it will come back at some point. And hopefully we'll know how to deal with it better, just in our daily lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we had crises before, but now they are becoming like more frequent, and this is because there is an acceleration in all fields, and this acceleration, unfortunately, also has given lower gaps between one crisis and the other. Yeah.
Just like economics. It's the crises have been happening more and more.
I would like to take the chance of exploiting, if you will, your career, in the sense that you are both professors, you both teach at university, and I would like to start with one of the questions coming from the public. So the question is this one. I would like maybe Ken to start answering to it, and then hear the idea of Paola. Where have you seen fragility while teaching to your students in this moment of pandemic?
Oh my God, I see it in a couple of different ways. We have people who actually are. I'm teaching in Malaysia. One of my students is in the Maldives, and he's still living at home with his folks, and he's still trying to be able to negotiate time zones, computer signals, access to equipment, to be able to figure out how to be part of that. So again, he's doing great, but he's kind of holding things together on the edge of it, always kind of being on the verge of being able to fall apart. And then at the same time, I have one of my favorite visitors in my classes is I have one of my students has a 3-year-old daughter, and she's been at home with her in class, and the 3-year-old daughter is always trying to come in and interrupt class and kind of get everyone's attention. And it's kind of, so those kind of things, there's always these outside forces that sort of interrupt in, which are interesting because normally in the classroom you removed yourself from reality, and you're in this little bubble that like art is pulled away from the world, and we can live outside of the world for those precious moments while we teach art, theory, economics, whatever it is. But now when we're doing this as it's online, it has to reintegrate back into the world. And that's one of the things that, and the situation itself is the world interrupting into it. And that's always, I find, an interesting part of what's happening.
I was thinking, when Ken was talking, I was thinking that, and this applies also to us, not just to students, that we will somehow appreciate more when we will go back to normality, the fact that you can, hug a friend or, sit close to a friend when going to school and to attend a class, things that we have always given for granted, right? So like the coffee chat, the chat at the coffee machine with colleague that, for us is normality, and is where best ideas for us, research emerge, right? So you confront yourself with other people. And now Of course, now you can expand through the technology, the opportunities to get in touch with people that eventually, are far away, and it gives you like opportunities to, I don't know, hear and guest, like invite guests from abroad. I mean, think now we are talking, Ken is in Malaysia, I am in Milan, these kind of things for sure are like the beauty of using the technologies. At the same time, things that, what Ken was saying, kind of getting into a bubble. That is what you do when you are in class, right? It's a moment for you. It's a learning moment. And probably like students in some cases didn't really think about it as that, and now they will appreciate more when they will have the opportunity to actually go back to school and devote and focus on class. I just have to focus on class. I don't have to handle all the other things that now they're managing, and this is very true. It's something that is very, very relevant. I think the social exchange that happens in interaction, physical interaction, is not exactly the same when it's mediated by the technology, for sure.
Yeah. I would like to, we have many questions. I would like to do my best to, since we don't have much time left, I would like to sum them up somehow. So building up on the concept of overcoming constraints, I would like to ask Paola, maybe, can results in overcoming constraints in the innovative environment of university being transported to communities with different causes of fragility? If you think, for example, to the digital divide, and summing up to that, you were mentioning this new media or this new way of communicating from one part of the world to another. This second part of the question, maybe I would like to ask it to Ken. What do you think is the future of multimedia? And especially with reference to your field of research, how will it affect, how will it bring people closer to fine arts, if in any way? So I would like to, Paola, to...
Yeah, this is a good, it's a very good question. And I don't have an answer, although one answer that comes to my mind, especially if I think about, for example, the digital divide that might come from less fortunate communities versus other kind of communities. And Ken was giving a good example with his student in Maldives. And I think one way of overcome this fragility would be of exploiting what I don't think we have been good at so far in the pandemic, exploiting the strict interconnection that are at a global level. So, one of the reasons why we are fighting we have a hard time in fighting the pandemic is because we didn't put our, opportunities, our strengths all at a system, right, together. So I think that one way of doing it, for example, is trying to use, going back to the constraint, using a computer as, we are used in many cases to think that after 3 years, the computer is old. It is not. We know that it is not. So one way of doing it would be of extending the life of products, so that this is more sustainable for the environment and also more sustainable for all of us in the community, not just for the privileged one. And I think this is a way to which you can actually, and this can be done at a global level. Not just if we look at each single country as a community, right? Yeah. Of the communities within each single country. And this is a way to me to put, I really think this, and I think that, also the production of the vaccine, for example, could have been done in a better way if we put all the strength and the powerful forces that we have all together, in a system. This is I really believe that, and we have not, honestly, politically and in general, each country has its own responsibility into this, because we haven't been successful in doing this, unfortunately. And this, I don't want to take too much time because there is a question. So
don't worry. Yeah, so Ken, if you can somehow refer to the new advent of multimedia and how it brings it.
I mean, overall, this whole crisis has kind of shown us sort of the bursting points of everything, of all our political systems, our digital systems, our economic systems, and all of that, so that hopefully we can look at this enough to address and hopefully make some corrections to. I mean, as I see and how I work with media is the idea of how can we use our relationship to media to get kind of like what we're doing here is a kind of a one example of trying to bring presence together and get that sense of the individual relating to the other, and that sense of connection to otherness to exist through media. That media doesn't become a thing, becomes a vehicle, becomes a thing unto itself that we treat as otherness, but also a vehicle for us to have otherness. And that media sort of inherently in its DNA wants to be about connecting things together. Unfortunately, of course, people like our good friend Mark Zuckerberg and so on are trying to turn it into forms of surveillance and forms of control. But the appeal is actually through that sense of otherness and that sense of how we deal with it as a sense of presence. And the more that we can valorize and develop things with media and use media in physical spaces and how we use media with things like this to sort of counteract and get back to the essence of what media is as a medium that creates a relationship with a relationship of each of us to the other in a fundamental way that goes beyond just that is, I'm looking at you face to face. I have to deal with you as actual people. You're not symbolic of anything. You are individuals that I'm dealing with, and you're dealing with me. And that sense of enhancing media to go in that direction, which is a very different direction than the surveillance capitalist direction, that's what I write about. That's what I'm interested in. I think that's one of the forces that we're starting to, that I think is also coming forward over the past, I would say, 8 or so years within the development of media and media art, that I think that people are trying to understand how to do that.
I see. Yeah, and it's something that there is something else that I wanted to ask you. If you agree on that, I would take the last 3 questions, 3 comments from the audience. Even though we are running out of time, but it's a pleasure to have you. So I'll do my best to sum them up. Some of the questions we're receiving, they are quite well, I would say tough to be answered. I read 2 of them, and I'll ask again Paola maybe to start building up on them. We are getting this question. To me, innovation is so complementary to fragility. Maybe my question is too broad, but how can you teach innovation, or at least an attitude towards innovation? This is probably the question at the basis of the development of any economic system. So it's very broad.
It is very broad, and as you know, there are different definition of what is innovation. So it's very true that it's difficult to teach innovation. Although I mean, what I try to teach is the way you make innovation happen within firms, right? So that is not that easy, especially when most firms start with an innovation, with an act of innovation that comes usually from an entrepreneur that has an idea and then that brings this idea to the market. And then the difficulty that most firms have when they grow is that to keep these entrepreneurial light over time, when they grow big and they tend to be very structured, to have a very bureaucratic system within the firm that do not allow innovation actually to flourish and to actually be put to the market. So what I try to teach is actually exactly to overcome the barriers that might emerge for large corporations to actually make innovation happen, and not to lose the touch with the market that usually comes when the entrepreneur, starts his idea, his business. Is usually coming from an idea that is related to something that he feels that is missing in the market, or that he sees that people might need in the market, right? So this is exactly what. And the one thing, it's interesting that this person, was putting it together with fragility, because this has a lot to do with fragility, in the sense that, what I think about fragility, and fragility again cannot be taught, right? But what you can teach people is to try to, first of all, see fragility as a strength and not as a weakness. And second, to actually scout fragility in other people. And why is this important? Because this creates empathy. When you're able to understand what are the elements that makes a person unique. We can say fragile, but mostly it's unique, like special. You actually can get in empathy with that person. Empathy is one of the main drivers of innovation, because you cannot create innovation if you do not empathize with the person you're trying to, for the person you're trying to innovate for, right? To create something new for and value for. So I think that I totally agree with the person that made the question that innovation and fragility has a lot in common. They're both difficult to be taught, but you can for sure try to facilitate this process of empathy that allows both innovation and fragility to become like something valuable for persons and companies alike.
One of the things.
Yeah, please.
Please. I was going to say, one of the things that this is reminding of, and that I always love, is the French philosopher Maurice Blanchot would talk about the act of being the writer, and saying the writer can never be the same as the audience, but yet the writer has to write as if they are the audience. They write as if they are the reader yet to come. And that whatever you do, you have to keep in mind that you may not be exactly like the people that you're addressing this to, but you have to put yourself in their place enough to actually be able to make the creative work.
Very good point. Yeah, sorry. And again, this is very important what you said. You don't have to think that you are the audience and the audience is going to think like you, because this is wrong, because in most cases it's not the case, right? But you need to put yourself in the shoes of the audience and put yourself on the other side to see how what they need, what they feel, what they absolutely, totally agree with what you said. Yeah.
And I would like to build up on what you just said, Ken. Sure. If we look at the other side of the moon, of the concept you just mentioned, it appears like people are making this question. It appears like there's almost never been a time in history, or at least it's very strong nowadays, the idea of battling for supremacy nowadays. Do you agree with that? Do you think that these has something to do with the idea of not being able of teaching, or at least inspiring empathy in people? Because this probably has the downsides when we bring it to the functioning of any economic system, maybe. The idea of needing to prevail over someone else. What do you think about it?
Which one of us do you want to have to start first?
I would like you, Ken, to
Okay. Part of the social contract with capitalism has always been that capitalism has to be subject to law. One of the things I find funny is, you can't have economic exchange if the government doesn't create money to exchange with. And there's always been that. And lately, we've been in this terrible situation where it seems like law has been subservient to unfettered capitalism, and this is why we have such social inequality these days. But I think that it's, again, it's going back to this idea of constraints. We have to have forms that have constraints that can allow for something, for something like capital to exist. If it's unfettered, it becomes like a virus. It just grows like a cancer, and it just grows uncontrollably. And part of hopefully teaching things like empathy is to if people get to see how other people's situations are, then maybe they don't think about just growth for themselves. And hopefully we will keep that social contract. and that social compact, which has been, I guess, the important part of Enlightenment thinking, has helped us move forward in some ways. But I'm also afraid that it's just completely falling apart. That's what I'm worried about.
Do you have an idea on that? What do you think about the idea of prevailing, Paola? Is it something that may have brought us to this situation? It's a very wide question.
It's a very difficult question, and for sure, I mean, we have been seeing, like, also with this all going on in the vaccine thing, the worst of capitalism, I think, right? Because again, what I was mentioning before, collaboration allows you to reach much larger goals. But of course, collaboration implies that you share the pie with someone else, right? And I think that the 2008 crisis you were mentioning was already like a signal of the unsustainability of the system of capitalism that we were building, and that was probably again accelerated by the technology since 2000 forward, right? What is, I think this is something that somehow needs to be put on the table. The problem is how you change it, and to change things, you need to change the system of incentives. There is no other way you can actually move people motives unless you actually change the system of incentive. If the system of incentive is represented by Wall Street and by what happens. I mean, you have seen what has happened with GameStop, right? With the retail investors, sharing information on social media and bringing like the title like up. The system. I mean, if what pays out is the value that is in the stock market, I think we are very far from something that is not the capitalism of supremacy. Again, it is the incentives that need to change. Showing that the most successful companies are not the ones that do better in the stock market, but maybe that create some value for communities that are less privileged, for example. These are things that we should put on the table as a variable sort of dimension to really like measure the success of a firm. Sorry, Ken.
No, it's fine. I'm just going to say it's always amazing to me that companies like Uber have such high values and they never make a profit, and it's because what we consider valuable in the stock market is very different than what we would consider valuable in the real world. And the thing with technology it's one of the biggest lies that I kind of feel like the technology companies have told us is they make everything sound like where we are today was inevitable, as if there weren't choices that we could have made to develop things in a different way that would have valorized other values than the ones that we have. And that's just not true. We could have gone in a lot of different directions at almost any time, and we would be in a different place today. And we have to be conscious of that. And we have to start saying, well, what are the things that valorize this or valorize that, and start to choose differently. I was having a conversation with someone recently, and we were talking about the idea of automation. And one of the reasons why people are going to be replaced by machines is if I buy a machine, I get to deduct the value of the machine every year, but an employee is considered expensive to me. If I stop deducting the value of the machine on my taxes, and I could deduct other things for having an employee on my taxes, I'd have employees and I wouldn't have machines. These decisions are made according to the values that we have made inherent within the systems that we have. And then we lose sight of the fact that we actually have the right to ask questions as to what those values are.
Yeah, but I think that, to conclude on a positive note, I believe that this pandemic, if I may, has taught us what are the shortcomings of this wrong system of values. And I think that, somehow we won't get out unless we change something. So I'm sure that, countries, politicians will have to give up something to make sure that we can all survive and get out of, of the current situation. So I am positive about that, because it seems like really something that has been created on purpose to actually show us that we were in the wrong direction. We are heading to the wrong place. And so somehow it's trying to redirect us towards some kind of you're right, system of values, and what you think it's really important in life, and and I totally agree about the example that you made about Uber, and I agree completely. I mean, doesn't sound good. A company should be rewarded for the value that it creates for the economy, for people, for jobs, for the welfare of everyone that is involved, right? Not for the value of a stock that sometimes doesn't really have assets behind it. So it's really a wrong direction that I'm sure that we're going to actually somehow diverge from, because the current situation is telling us that this is not the right road that we have actually taken.
Thank you very much. We had a couple more questions, but we really ran out of time, and I really wanted to thank you. It's been very interesting, and it's been I think a nice conversation, the one we had. So thank you again, Professor Paola Cillo from Bocconi University, and thank you to Kenneth Feinstein from Sunway University. I hope we will have the chance to discuss these topics more, maybe in the future. So
thanks a lot.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Also for me, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will.
Everyone who joined.
Thank you, Chris.
Last comment. Thank you for everyone. It was a wonderful conversation today. I just wanted to remind everyone to please visit the exhibit, Fragilità. You can actually learn more about Fragilità and see from different communities. You can see the perspectives from art and culture, from science and innovation, and business, all kind of coming together in one community. So there's an events page, there's more events coming. So again, thank you to everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.